to all the dispossessed youth of Africa, for perpetuation of communion with ancestral spirits through the fight for African freedom, and in the firm faith that the dead, the living, and the unborn will unite to build the destroyed shrines. Selah. Hello and welcome, beloveds, to another episode of Wake Up Africa. My name is Dr. Mumbi Saraki. How you doing? How's everything going? I really do want to, send you all the most positive, uplifting, courageous and powerful vibes. As I've said, we're in a mental marathon right now. So it's not what you believed last year. It's not the convictions that you had last year that mattered. But 1 year down the line, are you still as convicted about what is happening? Are you still fully aware that Babylon has fallen and what we're witnessing is the final remnants of that. There's so much to be discussed. But one of the things I really wanted to talk about is why is it that, the global Black nation can never fully come into themselves and know ourselves and gain the liberation we need to as a collective. I know many of us have individually done the work, made the transformation, made the transitions, etc., that needed to be made. As I keep saying, we've reached a tipping point. So, we're going to survive either way. But the reason is because of the fact that a lot of people, they're stuck in a MZUNGU mind. We were raised to be a European. Many of us on the African continent, across the world, we were literally cloned, beloveds. Before they could physically clone us, they spiritually and mentally cloned us. And many people have never been able to get out of that cloning. And there's a tweet I read a while back where this lady was like, before Africans can get their liberation, each African must confront the MZUNGU in their head, the MZUNGU part of themselves, basically. And that really hit home because I've been talking about this thing of group consciousness, beloveds. The fact that the collective that we are all engaged in. Before it was just our kingdoms and our nations, etc. Those collectives have a group consciousness that operates, that helps that collective, that nation, that kingdom to operate in cohesion. I've also mentioned before that there is a European group consciousness and there is an African group consciousness, which means globally as a melanated people, we are, whether you're a master, whether you're whoever you are affected by the collective thoughts of our people, and it acts like a pull. So you really have to be very strong, or that's why I always advocate for moving out of the cities, moving into the wilderness and kind of disconnecting yourself mentally from all the global narratives, because then they can pull you. It's like a vortex, it's like a magnet. It can pull you into that storyline, etc. And especially because as a melanated people, we're spiritual first. So we're spiritually connected in the realm that many of us don't even know exists, first before here. And what they managed to do, beloveds, because I told you it was a mental and spiritual colonization, and we were made to falsely believe it was physical and that we got out of it, but we've never gotten out of it. And the fact that we have foreign governments, foreign education systems, foreign hospital systems, foreign social systems, everything just confirms how much the colonization has actually gotten worse, instead of we've gotten less free rather than moving towards any kind of real liberation. And the problem why Africa cannot get out of this is because so many of our people are in the MZUNGU consciousness. So when we talk about coming together as Africa to liberate Africa, most people are seeing it through a MZUNGU lens. They're seeing it through the Babylon consciousness. They want to, they're like, yeah, let's create an organization within the matrix. Let's go for politics and elect all the people, that are revolutionary. Let's do this, let's do that. But it's all with a MZUNGU consciousness, beloveds, with a Babylon consciousness. And that is the thing we're fighting. You see, all these things that we witness outside that cause us pain and sorrow, and it's just like, how could they do this to Africa? How could they take out 5 presidents, 5 African presidents in a year? How could they do this? How could they do that? All of this, beloveds, it creates an anger and a remorse, in us. But that's not what we're really contending with. That actually doesn't matter if we were to fix what's here and collectively start to re-educate and reprogram as many of our people so that the collective consciousness of our people changes. Because right now we have betrayers who don't even really want to be betrayers, because they're operating in the Babylon consciousness, and you can't really blame them because that's the only frame of reference that they've been given all their lives. From the minute they were born, everything was done, even the birth was done in the Babylon system. Like, we forgot how African mothers used to give birth. It's insane. And so now many people will betray the cause just because their mind is wrong. So, you may want to liberate Africa. You may want to, people are always talking about African unity, but under what consciousness, beloveds? Because too many of us now are operating in a European consciousness, and that's why the African spirit, the African collective can't come together with our own coherent, cohesive and unilateral plan. And when you realize just the epic proportions of how these wicked geniuses put this all together, it's just like, whoa, because it was always about us. It's still about us. And you see now many people, so when we say that the collective, so each and every one of us is affected by the collective melanated consciousness, whatever that consciousness is. Now, if you realize that the majority of Black people around the world, melanated people, are in poverty, we're just like the worst of the worst, all least developing nations, engineered poverty, by the way, but, least educated, least this, least that, and then you're stuck in this matrix. You can see that a lot of our people have even been handicapped, and the people who could help, what the so-called middle class and the so-called leaders and revolutionaries are still in that European consciousness, because that's what they grew up with. And so and when I was talking about betrayers, beloveds, it's like, just because you see Africa's freedom through a European lens, you are betraying the cause. Because the world is mental, beloveds. If we can't even get a collective concept of who we are as a people and hold on to that, what's the point? And so they've got us because so many of our people are still in the Babylon consciousness. And so they're constantly leaking and pulling the Babylon consciousness into our own, melanated collective. And this is why Babylon doesn't have power over Africa because they have bombs and guns. I mean, that's just such a lie. They're a weaker being on multiple levels. Look at that athletics. Just do your research, beloveds. You'll see that the melanated being, the melanated vessel, is the highest level. Africa is poor because our own have been cloned to be Europeans, and then they're bringing that European ideology into our collective. So it's constantly, Babylon is constantly in our business because it's in our people's minds already. So that's why the most important thing right now is to change your consciousness, to even try and figure out what the African consciousness is. And it's not a complicated thing, beloveds, because you're not walking alone. You have a spiritual team. And the thing is to even concentrate more on, fully decolonizing our children's, everything that our children are learning, the entire children's education system, etc., so that they don't grow up as well with the Babylon mind. Because they want every generation to have that Babylon mind. And now, to top it all off, they're even going to make sure that you can only reach the highest Babylon consciousness. Because we are the highest level spiritual beings, beloveds, having this human experience. Anyway, let's take a short break. We'll be right back.
Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Wake up, Africa.
Welcome back, beloveds, to Wake Up Africa. My name is Dr. Mumbi Saraki. A special shout out, of course, to all the people who support us on Patreon and send us love donations through PayPal. We definitely release more stories on there, more, the videos come on there first. And, the news, which we're no longer covering because it's irrelevant, but we will share certain things on that channel. So definitely consider joining for as little as $2 a month. We are going to start many, many things spiritually, beloveds. I'm just wanting people to understand the spiritual dynamics so that when we go to spiritual warfare, people are actually, you're actually seeing results. But right now, with the world being back to front and upside down, a lot of us are not fully aware of the dynamics that kind of keep us, that keep us in this kind of, in this situation. Because the world is first and foremost mental, beloveds. And so you are what you think. And that's why the MZUNGU penetrated our mind and colonized our spirit so that they could clone us into becoming them, and then they could create their world. That's why the whole world looks like Babylon. You can come to Africa and you'll see, the Babylon skyscrapers. Everyone is now living in a square house instead of the round houses that our people used to live on, because that was the highest level energy, and that energy never got stuck. Stories for other days. So there's so much that you will see. There's so much indication that Babylon has taken over. And the great thing, the reason that we as an African people can't even remove ourselves or assert ourselves is because many are MZUNGU clones in a black body, even the ones who really have the best intentions for Africa. You've already been cloned mentally. And if you're not aware of that, and start decolonizing your mind, then you're a liability to the movement. And we really have to understand, beloveds, the only thing we need to change, we don't need to save the world. We don't need to change, we don't need to stop Babylon is falling. The only thing that we need to be concentrating all our energy on is changing our collective consciousness. And that means enough of us have to get into their ancient African mind so that becomes the overriding consciousness of our people. And then we can even start to see what would it look like? What would an African world after this crazy Babylon experience, what would that look like? What would our societies look like? How would we order our health? How would we have our education systems, etc., etc.? Because there's a great dismantling that needs to happen of the Babylon system, but it needs to start in us. Because I was just thinking, can you imagine that we never ever removed any of the government structures? And I know it's because they got puppets and stuff, but how can we think we gained independence, but we kept their government, we kept their hospitals, we kept their education, we kept their, currency system, we even entered the global money system because of them, because they'd already cloned us. And you see, if you look at what happened just before, even Kenya got independence, for example, is that a lot of the future leaders were taken. Like John F. Kennedy had some Kennedy airlifts with, one of our great leaders, what was his name? Tom Boyer. Amazing man. I'll actually talk about him one time. But so they had these airlifts where they got a lot of our African students who had gone through the MZUNGU primary and high schools, because they had these elite ones that they created for the chiefs and everything. They sent them to the divided states, to Canada, to the divided kingdom. And what happened is that not only were they learning, going to university, but on the weekends, they were being indoctrinated with, all kinds of MZUNGU, secret society information. Many were initiated during that time. And then these are the ones that came back and, of course, took the jobs because we kept the Babylon system. So you had to give someone, who had a degree, education is also a freaking society, but who had a degree, those jobs, and those people had already been cloned. You see, we never took it seriously. The loss of our Africanness, our African mind, that's when everything was shattered, beloveds. And we've never come back from that. So if we're very serious about transforming our great people and restoring this melanated planet to its rightful rulers, then we have to stop thinking and acting like the Babylon system. And it's so deep because so many of us don't even know what the African system would look like. But just start with the basics, beloveds, because our ancestors and our spiritual team is literally right here. You just can't see them because you haven't opened your first eye. Some don't even know their first eye exists. But so what you need to do is like start going back to the ways of our people, especially with food and with the way they communed with nature, and delve deeper, beloveds, with a willing spirit into or any information you can find. Do your research. If you're on the African continent, go and sit with the elders. My greatest blessing was the game changer for me, beloveds, was doing my PhD on Africa, on older Gikuyu women. I met women who are 120, 100, in their 90s. And all I was, it was all on like animals just coming through. It was all on self-perception, etc., etc. So there was so much that was revealed about how women were, etc., etc. But there was still a lot of secrets that they didn't share because they just don't trust our generation. And now I get why they don't trust our generation. It's not really about us. It's just the fact that we see the world through a Mzungu lens, through a Mzungu mind. And until we change that, beloveds, nothing else will change. And so yeah, go back to our foods, do your research. But I really believe like we need to create some kind of career. Like people need to be dedicated enough and call for it enough spiritually, where we can go through like a re-education, a decolonization within our lifetime. I mean, what else are we doing? We're highly supreme beings, beloveds. And that can be achieved in a twinkle of an eye, because the power that we have is that when you see what's wrong, the spirit automatically starts to make it right. Until next time, tuko pamoja.